The Smiling Human podcast is made possible by listeners like you. If you would like to experience more of these shows into the future, then please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Hello, and welcome to The Smiling Human, where collectively we evolve through inquiry. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of The Smiling Human podcast. My name is Oak, and I'm your host. Today, I'm speaking with Lynleigh Rose. Lynleigh is an intuitive guide, a self-love activator, and conscious sexuality mentor, helping men and women use their health and relationship challenges as gateways to deeper confidence, pleasure, and presence. Drawing on her personal journey, as well as her background in counseling and documentary filmmaking, she blends wisdom, intuition, and practical tools to guide those on a path of growth and expansion into elevated health, passionate relationships, and a more fully expressed life. Lynleigh is also the host of a podcast called Awakening with Lynleigh Rose, which I was on. So, our conversation today covers a breadth of topics from religious upbringing, dogma, sexual shame, to liberation, openness, and connection with one's authentic self. I hope you enjoy. Wonderful. Well, Lynleigh, thank you so much for being a part of the Smiling Human podcast. I'm excited for our conversation today.
So am I. Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So I'll ask you the question I ask each guest at the head of the show. What's the last thing that made you smile?
During lunch, I went out into my backyard and we have a new fence, and I was able to enjoy the sun on my bare skin by myself. I was definitely smiling a lot during that, so it was very enjoyable.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
There's nothing quite like sunlight to bring joy into the body. Beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So the listeners would have got an introduction to your work through the head of the show at the intro. And what they don't know is that you and I have had a series of conversations already. We had a pre-recording conversation to sort of prep us for this discussion, and I was on your show most recently. So there's some familiarity with the territory in terms of what you know and what I know about our own stories, but I feel quite excited and interested to showcase your journey and trajectory from your roots in faith and in the sort of religious social sphere to where you've come to now in this work, and draw some goodies out of that. So if you'd feel comfortable, I would welcome you to share that story here.
Yeah, so I grew up in Southern California, LA. I was a part of this performing family. My parents met as actors on a movie set, and we were very involved in our church. Music, church was a really big part of my life, and we sang and we performed a lot. And this religion was actually a part of my heritage. So this is a huge part of my family culture. My ancestors were some of the first Mormons. So I grew up Mormon, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And I just remember ever since I was little, going to church and being told by my grandparents every time I would see them, stay strong in the church, go on a mission, get married in the temple, all of these major milestones in the Mormon church. And so as a person who always wants to do what's right, that was my nature. I want to follow it. This is true. Everyone's telling me this is what I got to do. I want to do it full on 100%. And so I was very heavily involved in the Mormon church. It was my whole life. It was my identity. And through my upbringing years, I very soon began to pick up on the fact that the feelings that you have in your body related to your genitals are not okay to feel. And I had a lot of confusion and actually a lot of shame, feeling like I'm a bad person if I touch down there. So that led me to just fear of my body, fear of sexuality, and not really understanding how sexuality fits in a healthy way. as a human being, I had no clue, because the whole message was, you know, don't do anything until you get married. And if you do, then you have to actually confess to your bishop and tell him what you did, which I ended up doing. And he was my dentist. And a week after I confessed, I find myself in the dentist chair, bright red. I was filled with anxiety as a child. And so I really feel like the social anxiety that I developed was connected to the sexual repression that I was feeling inside, because it was around puberty where I started blushing randomly in the middle of class and being up in front of a class. And I really felt like even the thought of sex was super embarrassing and just brought so much anxiety into my body, almost like people could see my thoughts. I just became extremely self-conscious, and I was a very closed, tight, tense, almost contracted in my body because of all this. So, yeah.
Right. So my curiosity from this initial share, Lynleigh, is how is it that this repressive ethos was transmit? I know that from a dogmatic point of view, there's a lot of emphasis on the denial of the body. At least I don't know so much about the Book of Mormon, but in terms of the New Testament and the Old Testament, this emphasis on the denial of the body and the sins of the flesh, and do not spill your seed, and do not know a woman before marriage, and he who lusts after a woman has already committed adultery, these things. And so I'm curious, specific to your upbringing, where was this feedback coming from, and like, what did it look like, sound like, that led you to this internalized shame and constriction around this natural aspect?
That's a really great question. I think so. When you become, so even before, so let's start before. So as a child, just exploring my body, I think I was subconsciously picking up on the fact that this was wrong because I felt bad for it. I was never taught about these feelings. I thought I had done something really bad. And I think, just looking back on it, I think this was even before I was taught in church. But when you become a youth, you're taught, in your classes, and there's a little handbook for youth, the standards, and it talks about sexuality in there. No masturbation, no sex before marriage, and you get lessons about this. And but even before that, I remember having an experience where I would have these experiences, these pleasurable experiences by myself, and felt really like there was something wrong, like I wasn't supposed to be doing this. And now I've done, just a little side note, I've done a lot of healing work around this. And I can see that I was even picking up on these beliefs from those around me, my parents, in their energy. Because, right, we're always so connected to the energy of those around us and their beliefs. And just when I felt turned on or felt alive and just felt good, as kids do normally, I was met with resistance. And this is something that I'm only recently seeing and understanding, that this was actually, I'm so empathic and I'm so tuned in to how people are responding to me. So when I'm met with resistance, when I'm feeling good, I automatically feel like that's wrong and shut off that part of me. So on just an unconscious level, this was happening energetically, the messages that were all around me. And then consciously, when I became, when I was 12 to 18, in those years, I was taught at church and in our handbooks, this is not okay. And if I want to go to a church school, which I did, I went to BYU in Utah for college, you have to confess anything before you go. And if you want to go on a mission, you have to confess. And if you want to get married in the temple, I did all of those things. And before each one, I ended up saying, oh, I think there might have been this time, and talking to my bishop about, the horrible thing that I had done by feeling pleasure in my body.
Right. So it sounds like there was almost a subconscious and environmental priming that you're noting around the empathic aspect. We pick up on notions that are not necessarily detected exclusively through the literal explication, so to say. People aren't going, oh, don't do this. They will and did, as you mentioned. But being around people who themselves have denied, repressed, or suppressed a natural energetic flow of their own humanness, it imprints upon us and impresses upon us the way to be, because children learn through mimicry. And I think that that's a really important thing to remember. So it sounds like this aspect of the empathic energetic imprint was then compounded by the rhetoric and the perhaps dogma, to use maybe a more intense word, around what is or isn't appropriate for a quote good Mormon end quote to be doing. I can imagine that this would generate a lot of pressure. Having dealt with my own, internalized shame around sexuality, I know that there's a need for that kind of healthy expression. And from a psychoanalytical point of view, even if we ignore our needs, they don't go away. In fact, they will take over other aspects of our energetic resourcing to try and get those needs met, and they kind of come out sideways. And so I'm wondering if there was a point or a series of points for you where that pressure built up to a point where you could no longer sustain it. Was there a breaking point or sort of a major shift out of that repression?
So for me, in my experience, I had so much fear around sex before marriage by myself or with a partner that I really turned that off. So I did not have any, I was not, I didn't feel like a sexual being. I was very disconnected from my sexuality. I was not in my body. I was very insecure. And as I went through those years of college where I was, insecure about, I didn't want to be with a man and have him touch me in any way because that could lead to sin. And because of that, I also developed a lot of insecurity in my body. I didn't feel womanly and wasn't connected to my sexuality. So I went through those years. I was very careful. And then I got married, and then suddenly you can have sex. And that really didn't do much for me because I didn't know how, and I wasn't connected to my sexuality at all. So it just continued to not be a part of my life. It was very, boring, mundane, kind of like sporadic, because I wasn't really in that energy at all. And then that was 7 years of my marriage. I had 3 children, and then I got divorced. I had an awakening. I began to see that there's a way bigger picture here, that it is not the one true path, is not Mormonism as I had been taught. I began to ask questions. I began to trust my inner knowing and connect with my inner self. And it was through that I realized why I had gotten married to my husband, which I can go into, but that's the point. That was the point where everything opened up and I separated myself from him and began to meet my erotic side and see it as beautiful. And it was always there. It was just completely shoved into this dark closet. And that's when everything kind of exploded. And I went onto the extreme side, which I can get into. But yeah, I mean, the reason why I met my husband, just really briefly, was, or how we ended up together, because we were so sexually suppressed. And then now he's asking me out. I was going to grad school at the time in Massachusetts. There wasn't a lot of commonalities. We didn't have a ton in common. He's from Massachusetts. I'm from California. I just happened to be there for grad school. And yet there was one thing. We were both very sexually suppressed. And those feelings began to arise when we would be together, although we were very careful. But nevertheless, we felt some intensity there. And so we went to the bishop, like any good Mormon would do. And I believe I was the one who led us to the bishop. I don't think that was his idea. That was mine. And we sit there with the bishop and tell him, it's getting a little close. We're a little concerned. Do you have any advice for us? It's nothing serious, but we don't want to sin. We don't want to do anything really bad here, because that would be humiliating for our whole families. And, we can't take the sacrament, which is the bread and the water. And so everyone can see who's sinning because they're not taking the bread. So it's very like this external shame. And a few weeks into this of confessing and asking the bishop, what did we do? Did we do anything bad? He goes, you know what? These feelings belong in marriage, so you should set a date. And I trusted this was a man called of God, and he's telling me I should marry him because these feelings belong in marriage. And I was so naive, this innocent little girl that, I was 20, I guess 26 at the time. But so that's what we did. And then we got married. And when I realized I had this awakening that we actually had gotten married for the wrong reason, we really weren't the right fit for each other to really see each other and go deep in the kind of relationship that I wanted, that I began to see was actually possible for me, which I didn't see that before. And just when I put it all together, it just became very clear I needed to actually leave this marriage and let him be with someone who's right for him, maybe with someone who's right for me. But we were not going in the same direction because he was still Mormon and saw me as, on Satan's path now. I was following Satan. I was in the dark side.
So this moment of awakening that came to you after you had followed the bishop's advice and entered into marriage and done what you thought at the time was correct, was this a single experience? I'm very curious about what the light switch moment was, as it sounds like it brought forward a lot of illumination, a lot of understanding, and a recontextualization of the relationship, the dogma, the history, all of these pieces. So I'd love to know what happened and the fruits that it bore.
Yeah, beautiful question. So I did have a very clear vision that came to me, but leading up to that vision was a year or so of exploring, doing yoga, basically. Practicing yoga in my living room with my kids crawling all over me. I wasn't anything serious like going to a yoga retreat or doing even classes, because I was still very closed to anything that wasn't Mormonism. I just got these DVDs. I would start doing them. And it was through that process, and I started eating really healthy. I started juicing fresh fruits and vegetables, smoothies, just doing all this plant-based, high nutrient dense foods. And I felt myself become more connected to the planet in a way I never knew was possible. A lot of gratitude for the planet suddenly was coming in. And then through the yoga, I started to connect to my inner self. And that was leading up, and it was the end of the summer. So it was like this whole year, January to, the end of the summer. I went on a trip, and a few weeks prior, I had been looking at myself in the mirror, realizing I had this inner critic in my head as I was putting on my makeup I had never heard before. And I started to hear it was saying all these negative things, like, you're only beautiful if you're wearing makeup, you have an ugly face, you need to hide yourself. And I just realized that I had actually been plagued with this negative voice, this negative inner critic my whole life about my appearance. And it had also caused the anxiety and just a lot of comparing myself and really being self-centered. I wasn't able to focus on other people because I was blushing. I was feeling anxious. I was feeling like, oh no, everyone's looking at me. How are people seeing me? And it all just kind of became clear to me when I was putting on my makeup and I started to hear this inner critic. And so I went on this trip in August, and I woke up one morning. It was my mom was getting remarried. I woke up one morning, we're on the beach, and I just had this feeling I should go for a run without makeup. I want to defy that voice. I feel like I'm preparing to defy my inner critic. And so it was a big deal for me because red hair, I feel like I look very different without makeup. Yeah. My eyes are really, eyelashes are blonde. I'd always worn makeup, and I was afraid of what people would think of me. And I just decided I'm going to go on this run by myself without makeup on the beach. And something really profound happened on that run. I just remember I would hear my inner critic say, oh, those people are going to be judging you that you're passing. And I would go, fuck you. Sorry. I'd be like, I don't care anymore. And then I would go onto the boardwalk, in the water. And I just remember looking out at the water and had this feeling of God doesn't make mistakes. You're beautiful as you are. And it was in that moment that I decided I'm going to look for beauty in my natural face. So that was the beginning. And it was that August, that beginning, that summer point that led me to defy my inner critic, challenge everything I had ever known in my life. And so I decided to go out 9 months without makeup. And it was a 9-month period without makeup, going to church, doing all the things, facing my fears head on, putting myself in the most uncomfortable situations ever, and looking into my religion, questioning, is this church really true? Doing all the research, asking all the questions. And I was also pregnant. I had conceived my daughter right at the beginning of that, on that trip, on the beach run. She had been conceived probably like the day before. And it was a 9 months of pregnancy as well. And it was at the end of those 9 months that I decided not to go back to church. I decided almost like soon after that, I'm going to get divorced. This is not right. And I had a very clear vision. Would you like me to share that?
Please, yes.
Okay. This is after I had my daughter. Soon after, I would be going for these runs, and my kids were, with their dad on Saturday mornings. And I would just go around the neighborhood and I would just be looking up, like everything I had ever known had just come crashing down. I didn't know what was real anymore. My whole life I didn't know what life was. Why am I here? What's the purpose? What is all of this? And so I'd be asking and just opening up to finding some kind of an answer for that. And I just remember I would come home from these runs and just write, just continually just write. I would just get so much inspiration. And one time I saw in my mind an image of me floating up into the sky, and everything that was not me just fell down. And the only thing left was this pure, beautiful light, my essence, my pure being. And I felt that. I felt, wow, I'm not all these things. What I look like, my gender, even like what I talk like, all these things about me. It's actually so much deeper than that. And then I looked around and I saw, oh my gosh, everyone is rising up. And that's who everyone is. And I saw that everyone actually they don't realize that. A lot of people have that light covered from beliefs. And so I just saw this thick muck around our light and all these false beliefs about, we think this is who we are. It's rooted in pain. And it's actually not. So people look down to try to figure out who I am. This is who I am, but it's not. And it's just by letting go that of all of those that we can feel who we are. But I just saw that all the pain in the world and all the harm is people acting from that place of having that muck over their light. And so everything just became clear because I felt like suddenly I could see everyone for who they were. And I would just be walking around and interacting with people. And I was looking under the surface now. I had never done that before. And I had felt myself under the surface because I had defied my inner critic for that period of time, that 9 months, where now I was clear that there was something deeper inside me than my appearance. And that's when I began coaching, and I called myself a light coach at first because I was helping people to connect to their inner light and just reflecting to them who they are.
There's such a great deal of mirroring, Lynleigh, between the story of my own awakening that I shared on your podcast and the pieces that you're offering here. And this, for the listeners' information, this is the first time I'm hearing this story, so I'm feeling quite a resonance and kinship, perhaps a kindred feeling. So thank you for putting that forward. One of the things that's arising for me as I've been listening to all these different pieces that you've shared is that it sounds as though the main pivoting point was, or could be conceptualized as, the moment where you started connecting to what was real in you and for you, rather than deferring to anything that would come from the outside. And I think that that's a really remarkably powerful piece to sort of distill out and maybe take from the micro of your story to the macro of what is, or could be said to be, a common experience for a lot of people who are raised in faith or raised in more shame-based environments, such that when we turn our attention into the center of our being, we reflect consciousness on consciousness, and we start to inquire and go deep and to illuminate, whatever words we want to use. What we're really doing is we are turning our focus and the aperture through which we would receive information and wisdom towards a center of genuine truth. And don't get me wrong, we can absolutely deceive ourselves. It happens all the time. I'm not free from having failed in that kind of way, but it can be said that when we are tuning into this inner world with a level of curiosity, that we are in connection to something more real because it is actually connected to life. We're feeling our own nervous system. We're feeling what feels like expansion or contraction, elevation or weight. And this will provide us a living compass or a living counterweight to whatever rhetoric or stories or family dynamics, family stories per se, that are projected onto us during our youth and will necessarily have shaped all the other aspects of our development up to that point. I find that remarkable, and it sounds, knowing that the pendulum swung, it sounds like that was the opening point, but maybe not the final landing piece. And so I wonder if you can maybe speak to how you went from this. You've spoken to the transition, right? There was the repressive, the denial, the dogmatic, into this open receptivity, curiosity, inquiry centerpiece, and then you sort of swung in the opposite direction. So I'm curious, what did that look like? How did you find yourself moving from, extreme A to extreme B?
Mm. I actually began to question the rules, all the rules. I started questioning them one by one. The first was, as I was feeling like I needed to get divorced, and that was coming up and realizing, I started talking to men. I've never shared this before. Not intentionally, but people that would come into my life from various like ex-Mormon groups where we were talking and having friendships. So I had never had friendships with other men. This is really significant because all through my marriage, I felt like I couldn't talk to anyone of the opposite sex. I thought, there's suddenly, I used to actually only be friends with mostly guys growing up. That was who I resonated with. I had better conversations with guys. I just felt more like I could, I don't know, be myself, maybe. I wasn't always the one with all the girlfriends. And then when I got married, suddenly I couldn't connect with anyone of the opposite sex. It felt very very confusing and limiting, and it caused a lot of emotional turmoil, I think, subconsciously. And so just to start to say, you know what, I'm connecting with this person who's also going through leaving Mormonism. I want to have a chat with them on, Messenger, and see what their experience is like. And opening the door for that was me starting to defy the rules. And now going back, there's a conscious way to do that, where you have a conversation with your spouse and you say, look, I'm going to have a connection with someone, and I'm going to have a friendship with, but at that point, I did not have the relationship where we were even able to, we were not, it was not a conscious connection at all. It was not a conscious marriage. So just opening myself up to having connections and exploring what was happening to me with other people was really important for me on my path. And that led me to, say, I want to get a divorce. And that was also another rule, you don't do that, but this is what I feel I need to do. And after I was separated, I met up with a man and had a sexual experience before my divorce was final. And so I started kind of like looking at life as like, who is coming up with these rules? Why is there a rule that I have to be divorced before I can be with another man? What is all this about? So my own personal journey was really just questioning and looking at what was right for me and what felt like it was my next step. And I learned a lot through that. And that also led me to, have a lot of sexual experiences. And some were good, some were not so good. But, some were very random, and, and it was what I needed to experience. And so that's kind of where that went.
Mm-hmm. It makes sense when you're expressing it in terms of what the necessary counterbalance might be. I can imagine when we are in a more aligned and natural state, our exploration is encouraged within reasonable social boundaries, right? And in some sense, the Mormon church thinks that their boundaries are reasonable because they're dictated by God. Fair enough. That's a position to take. But what we notice when we look at the healthy development of adolescents and adults is that repression isn't the answer, right? Shame-based lessons are not what produce matured and integrated individuals. And so when you have finally, in this point in your journey, sort of sloughed off this weighted blanket of someone else's morality, we might say, and put yourself in the driving seat of decision making, which is not easy and is bound to lead to mistakes, don't get me wrong. What it does do, in addition to leading us into a lot of odd decisions, is it provides us with the opportunity then to learn and grow through those, such that our decision-making apparatus or mechanism is developed to the point that it ought to have been at that point. And so when we have such a great repression, what we see oftentimes is people go kind of intensely the other way. I haven't drank water for a month. I'm going to drink 5 liters in a minute. And you're like, whoa, okay. We've sort of tipped the ship in one direction here. So that makes a lot of sense. And I appreciate the courage and vulnerability that you've demonstrated in offering that in this space. And to the listening audience, I believe that it will be beneficial for those listening to hear it. I will say, just for this moment, we'll take a brief break and we'll come back with the second half of the show. I hope you're enjoying the show so far. I wanted to take a brief moment to talk about just how you can help this show grow into the future. Did you know that we have an Instagram, a YouTube, and a Patreon? Probably. But if you're listening on YouTube, like many of you are, I would invite you to subscribe, to like this video if you've enjoyed it, and to leave a comment. Let me know what you thought. Let me know if you have any questions or maybe guests that you want me to interview. If you're listening on Spotify or Apple Music or any other podcast platform, then please take this moment to rate the show. All of these actions go a long way to helping the Smiling Human podcast reach more people and grow into the future. Thank you so much. Fantastic. We are now here with the second half of the show, which means we are into the section called the Question of the Week. This is where I invite our guests to bring forward a question or inquiry, something that's important to them. Maybe they've been thinking on it, or they think it would be valuable for the audience to hear us discuss. So, Lynleigh, what have you got for us this week?
Okay, so have a little background with this question. This is a question about your experience as a man with your sexual desire. Now, I grew up in a culture, just a little background, where a lot of women are very sexually suppressed. And I grew up listening to their view of men. And a lot of that was they see men as superficial, easily distracted by a beautiful woman, as if that's a really bad thing. You know, they see sex as like this lowly base, like natural man kind of experience that, so they put themselves above men, actually, even though men are in the leadership roles in this church. But a lot of women see a lot of negative in men around their sexual desire. And so women are always, curious, or I think outside of that religion, a lot of women are always wondering, what is it really like to be a man? How is that different than being a woman in how they experience sexual desire on a daily basis? So I would love for you to just explain that, your sexual desire over the years, your journey with that, and how you felt about it.
Thank you for that. Yeah, it's definitely something that has developed over time, particularly alongside my own healing journey and my own journey of integration. For the first part of my adolescence and sort of awakening through puberty, there was a lot of repression and rejection of my own desires through. I won't get into the full story here. If you're curious about it, listeners, you can go and listen to my conversation with Tyson Adams. He and I dive deep into my own story and his work alongside that. But as a result of what I had gone through, I was left with this impression that my own sexual impulses were dangerous and unwanted by women, that it was a betrayal of the feminine in some sense to be a sexual man or to have sexual desires. And that led to, like we spoke in the first half, it's not that went away. The needs didn't go away. They just were sort of hijacked by other means, right? So looking at, I was drinking a lot, smoking a lot of cannabis. I was using porn for a number of years, compulsively, especially during my adolescence. Was definitely suffering with addiction and uncontrolled and unmitigated use of pornography. And what that did is it promoted kind of what you're speaking to in the perspectives of the women in the church, that my sexuality was very much objectifying. It was not oriented towards connection or intimacy or grounded in my body, but it was all mental and all being used as a means of coping with a deep sense of dis-ease in my body or unease in my body as a result of trauma that I had incurred at a very young age. And so it wasn't until I was 22, maybe somewhere around there, where I had what do you want to call it? It's not an awakening experience, but an unrepressing experience. I don't know, a medicinal experience that sort of hit me like a truck. I was not prepared for that. And all of these memories of sexual trauma came back at once. Not a pleasant experience, but thank God for my cousin and her husband who were there with me when this happened, by happenstance or by fate, and held me in such unconditional love and support, and were really able to affirm for me that what had happened wasn't my fault, and that I wasn't wrong or dirty or bad, that it was something that had happened to me, and that I still retained some level of purity in my being and in my soul. And that was a pivoting point for me, because I now had a new piece of information that I could contextualize my desires, my habits, and my experiences with. I could look back and say, okay, if this happened, I can see a through line of pattern that I was repeating throughout nearly all of my sexual experiences, and that characterized most of my sexual urges and desires. That was startling, to say the least. And what that led me to was celibacy. I took time to just stop all of it. I quit pornography at the same time. Cold turkey. Was like, we're done with that, because that's linked to the same piece. And what that did is it opened up a space. It opened up a space for me to reevaluate, just like you were speaking to, Lynleigh, where you were able to touch in and go, what's real for me? Like, what's actually true? What feels good in my body? What was learned? What's been repeated? What do I actually want? Like, am I doing what feels best for me? Am I behaving in a way that feels natural? And I started to explore sacred sexuality, the tantras, the work of Mantak Chia and sexual qigong. And that helped to ground in and heal the parts of my trauma that were held in the body. So the tension, the nervous tension, the fear aspects that were still loaded in the nervous system all throughout. But that wasn't the complete picture. And it actually hasn't been until maybe the last 5 years that I found the accompanying part that has really grounded in this broad sea of, sexuality into something that feels like I'm able to celebrate and embody and be with, and even in some circumstances, help other men find in themselves. And this other aspect has been along the anima work. And I speak about my anima integration processes in the episode that you and I did, as well as the episode I did with Matt Sturm. So if people are curious and go, what the hell is the anima? Why does that mean? It's the contrasexual principle within Jungian philosophy, essentially the feminine aspect of a man's psyche. Why this is important to sexuality and relationships is as follows. All of our relating with women as men is shaped by our impression of what woman is during development, and that shapes our anima function. And so if sexuality was denied by women, by mother, sister, aunt, by female teachers, or female, what do you call them, colleagues or peers, there's the word I'm looking for, then what the impression is of woman is that woman does not want or rejects or shames this male aspect. And so what's so painfully ironic about this is that in a heteronormative ethos, woman wants the sexual man and man wants the sexual woman. Those are an implicit and complementary set of elements of our humanity. And so I was sort of experiencing this closure or this distortion in myself where there was something that felt and was genuinely natural, but was being impressed upon by a distorted and false sense of what the other could want or receive. As I started to unpack my impressions about women, my own integration and family healing, and looking at all of these different pieces of sexuality, what I started to realize and what started to happen for me is that it became really easy to be friends with women because what woman was expanded and grew and deepened and increased in resolution and became more complex. And it wasn't this rigid means to an end, as dastardly as that sounds, but because of the traumatized brain shaped by pornography and shame, that's all that could be managed, so to say. And so now I find myself with a connection to my own sexuality that is not limited to relationship necessarily. It's not even related to the act of sexual connection, but it is this innate force. And I call it phallos. It's not my word. I use the word phallos to describe it. It comes from Eugene Monich in his book that's titled the same. And essentially what it is I've discovered that my life essence as a man, the yang that is characterizing my soul, is non-distinct from that sexual essence. It's not the same as desire. It's not the same as orgasm or pleasure, but it's not separate from it. And so when I feel strong, when I feel creative, when I feel joyful, when I feel alive, that is this sexual energy. And to deny that now would be folly. It would be insane, really, because I'd be denying something so essential to my being that I could not function. And what that has done now for me, to make a long story long, is contextualized desire. So now if and when, because Lord knows it happens nearly every day, this arousal or this attraction arises, what it is to me now is a signal that I am alive. I am a man. There is a natural biological process going on. Maybe it's an energetic process. And what I've learned to love and celebrate is the feeling itself, the feeling as such. Like rather than when we are aroused as men going, I need to do something about this, get something, get off, find some pleasure, conquer, and claim. It's like, what if we took this moment of arousal, this sense of attraction, and this captivation or bemusement with the feminine as something good in itself? Can I be here and see this beautiful woman and be like, wow, I feel good. This is great. Thank you, lady over there who I may never know. Amazing. I love being a man because being a man is feeling attracted to women. And that's great. That feels awesome. It doesn't have to lead anywhere. So that's sort of the arcing picture of trajectory, if that
Mm.
answers.
Yeah, I want to share something about
Yeah,
that. Oh,
please.
I love that so much. And that's so aligned with my work, my passion right now, in just recognizing that our essence, our human core essence is sexual. That's the feeling that kids feel just being alive, the beauty of being alive. And I begin to feel this aliveness, this connection to sexual energy, which is different than just arousal, just oh, I'm really turned on and I need to do something. It's more of an experience of just looking at the vibrant colors of the sky and the trees against the sky, or tasting, a piece of mango, and just anything with my senses. Now I'm actually able to enjoy the sensation of pleasure in such a deeper way. And, and I feel this orgasmic energy going through my body. And the past few years, this has happened to me. Now I feel more alive than I ever have. And it's, I think, just that the breathing in and the enjoyment and the presence with all these feelings. And just speaking to you don't have to do anything with it. You don't have to go after the woman. So I had this experience. I was in Miami a few weeks ago going to this conference, and I had all these amazing connections. Everywhere I went, there was some profound connection. And one of them was my Uber driver driving from the airport to my hotel. And the whole time he's staring at me in the rearview mirror as we're talking. He's not just staring at me. We're having a conversation, but he was really looking at me a lot. And I was like, please look at where you're going. And it was actually such a connected conversation. It wasn't like I was feeling there's something really important happening here. We're just connecting. Who knows why, but our souls are connected. There's a deeper connection, and I'm feeling in my body here. And when we got there, he even mentioned, I can't stop looking at you. And it's not because it's not because of what I look like. It was really the connection and the energy there. Maybe there's a little of what I look like too. I don't know. When we got there, he was going to take me out, open my door. And he asked, if he could give me a hug. And I was like, yeah, I would love that. And, in the car, he reached over and we hugged, and then he tried to kiss me. And I said, and he did a little bit, I was like not expecting it. And I was like, I pulled back, and he said, you don't want this. I think he was feeling the sexual energy between us. And I said, I don't need to kiss you right now. Oh, maybe we can just have a hug and just be grateful for this connection. And a lot of men I see are in that place of they feel like they need to do something when they feel that. instead of what you were just describing, which I feel like I'm in the place now of just enjoying what is. And it's a miracle to even be alive.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear that, and I imagine that the story you're describing is familiar and similar to things that probably every woman listening has gone through in that sense. And what's startling about that is that it highlights or uncovers a great deprivation in the development of the masculine in terms of our sexual understanding or erotic understanding. And I would put forward one word that I think is actually lacking, which is this notion of containment. And containment is not suppression. Containment is not rejection. It's not pushing away, but it's holding. And this is actually an absolute essential element of masculine erotic potential. That when we think about, lasting longer in bed or being a good lover or being a good husband, showing up for our women, we need to be able to contain. And that's not, again, with locked walls or in, airtight containers. We're not constricting. Containment is not constricting. It's essentially saying all that is, if that's my own arousal, my own desire, my own excitement, is okay, it's welcome, and it has somewhere to be without needing to be pressed in or pushed out. And this is something that when I was hosting the No More Heroes Summit, which is available, it's a Mythic Masculinity Summit. This is actually where Lynleigh and I met, which is great. All the listeners can find it at nomoreheroes.ca/summit. I say this summit and I plug it because Manu Vitae speaks about Tantra and the path of subtlety, and how there's these two competing forces inside our bodies as men, but as humans in general. One is sort of the gas pedal, which this is a perfect analogy, that the Uber driver was sort of leaning into, which is the go, go, get, and the listening to the genes. Let me push it forward and create a child kind of energy. And the other is the brake, which is this tempering force that allows for the depth of sensitivity, of sensation, and of energy cultivation to broaden and expand in such a way that's actually deeply nourishing to all parties involved. And that can't happen when there is an outcome orientation. So one of the things I speak to in my own coaching is the difference between process orientation and outcome orientation. And if we are, especially in relationships, focused on outcome, we will miss the forest, miss the trees in the forest, or, not see the forest through the trees. That's what it is. We're not able to recognize that the things that are happening in the moment, all of the actions, if it's communication, if it's verbal or nonverbal, the sensations, that's the point. That's why we're here. It's not about arriving somewhere. Because as soon as we have this outcome orientation about needing to get somewhere or to do something, what we've done is we have prioritized something outside of the present. And what that does is it actually creates a chasm or a distancing between ourselves and whomever or whatever we're engaging with. And so one of the things that Manu talks about that I thought was super powerful is slow down. Right? If we really want to find this connection and find our virility as men or our erotic magnetism as women, we need to slow down enough to be able to feel every centimeter or inch of the journey. Because without that, we're not connecting to the root where all of this life is blooming forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And on my journey to connect with my erotic side, this part of me that I didn't know existed, I learned this concept. I'm just going to share real quick. I worked at a club, a strip club, as a dancer for a few months. And it was just part of my next steps in exploring this part of me. Because again, remember, I had let go of all the rules and now life was just a game. And I was here to learn what I was here to learn, no matter if it was right or wrong, like black or white, whatever. And so as I was preparing and I was learning how to to actually show up in that way in front of people, that was huge for me, because of course, like I was so shy that was like a really big deal to show up in that way in front of people. But one of the things that I learned very quickly, and that I got some guidance on from other dancers, is that the slower you move, that's actually what is the most erotic, and that is how you can be the most successful in, in dancing for men. And so as I was exploring how I move, at first I had this initial um, instinct to move fast, and right, that's like how I normally was before. And when I slowed it down, I carried this skill with me into my life. I don't encourage anyone to go work at a strip club just to get these skills. But for me, that was part of my path. And I've slowed down in how I dance. If I were to dance for a man, in my relationships, which is just a really important part for me, in embodying that part of me, I feel like I need to express it through dance. And so slowing it down, but also just slowing down and breathing in my day-to-day life as I'm moving through the world. And when you do this, you start to notice that most people are so tight and tense in their bodies and so closed. And you're almost like the only one walking through the airport aware. And everyone's like, where are we going? Right. And in that space, that's where the magic happens, I found. That's where the people come in. That's where the bird comes in, or the sign, something that I notice that is so significant for me, that connects me to something greater. And it's in the slowing down.
Brilliant. Brilliant. I think that that's a lovely place for us to wrap up and land. For the listeners who are curious to get in touch with you and know more about your work and uncover the offerings that you have been able to cultivate as a result of this, what I would call broad and wild journey back home, where can they find you?
Yeah, they can go to my website, lynleighrose.com. And I actually have meditations for men to help them connect with and move their sexual energy through their bodies. And for women as well, to open up to seeing, to just embracing their sexuality, and men to really experiencing their sexuality in a new way and having a different relationship with it. And I also have other programs, Magnetic Masculinity, where I teach about how men can do this in a greater way. But yeah, my background also, I have a program called Empowered Healing for Women. And this is what my primary focus has been over the past 5-6 years. And it's only now evolved because I've realized the importance of our sexuality and fully expressing our sexuality and integrating all the shadow aspects to becoming a healthy human being. And so my focus has been on health and helping people to overcome chronic health issues. But now it's really expanding into sexuality and the importance of that on the healing journey.
Brilliant. And as always, those links will be in the show notes and description of this episode. Lynleigh, thank you so much for being a part of the Smiling Human podcast. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much. It's been amazing.
And that concludes this episode of the Smiling Human podcast. Thank you so much for listening. But before you go, I have 2 invitations for you. The first invitation is to receive a free gift. I've created a free insight journal. This is a 30-day self-reflection and introspection journal that you can download at no cost in the description below. Go have a look and join the journey. The second invitation I have for you is, if it feels within your means and possible for you, then please head over to patreon.com/thesmilinghuman. Becoming a patron will give you access to perks like behind-the-scenes footage and access to live Q&As with me monthly. You also get voting privileges to help pick new guests or to help guide other episode content. Truly, the support of listeners like you, paid or unpaid, goes a long way. So if you could like, share, subscribe, and give a rating on the podcast app. All of that goes a long way. Thank you to each and every one of you who's been on this journey with me. See you again soon.